The 1970s, a decade of bold style and fearless innovation. But let's be honest, not every bright idea back then struck gold. Some fizzled out spectacularly. Get ready for a trip down memory lane as we look back at some of the 70s most unforgettable commercial fails. Bell Picture Phone. Bell Telephone, who later became known as AT&T, built a prototype telephone called the Model 1 Picture Phone at the 1964 World's Fair. A few of these were operational throughout the 1960s. In 1970, Bell introduced its first commercial picture phone, but the service never really caught on. They charged $160 per month for the equipment and the service, plus a fee per minute on calls. That would be at least $1.2 per month in today's money, and that's if you never used it. The other downside of this piece of technology was that it was only intended to be used for person-to-person calls, and not full rooms of people like you might see on Skype. They tried to expand the service and even came out with a Model 2. But ultimately, they pulled the plug on it in 1972. In March of 2019, a pair of Model 2 picture phones sold for $7,575 at a New York auction. For that price, you'd expect it to at least predict lottery numbers, not just show you who you were avoiding. Polaroid Polavision. Polaroid dominated the instant photography market decades before the digital camera ever did. Following the success of the SX70 and one-step cameras, Polaroid decided to enter the home movie market in 1977. This market had been dominated by one of their competitors, which was Kodak and their Super 8 film. The Polaroid Polavision was designed to use a cartridge which resembled a small video cassette. It could be exposed and then developed in just minutes. The captured images could then be viewed on a special tabletop viewer, or if you remove the reel of film from the inside, then it could be shown on any Super 8 projector. The only problem was Polavision was a flop, and it never really became as popular as their film cameras. You had to shoot in very bright light, colors were flat and muddy, and they couldn't record sound the way that Super 8 cameras could. This became Polaroid's first commercial failure, and they ceased production in 1979. Today, you can find these cameras listed on eBay anywhere from $25 to $100. Instant home movies with no sound and muddy colors. Sounds like a perfect recipe for a nap. Sansui Quadraphonic Sound. The Sansui Quadraphonic Sound was a 4-channel home audio system that was completely different from the 2-speaker system that people had in the early 70s. Musicians had been experimenting with 4-channel recording since the late 60s. But Sansui was the first electronics maker to develop and sell the quadraphonic amplifier for the home market in 1972. It sold for $200, which is about $1,200 today. Other competitors also introduced quadraphonic systems, and some had joystick controllers which allowed listeners to shift the audio balance from left to right and front to back so that they could find that perfect sound. Record companies loved the idea, and some of the biggest names like Aerosmith, Eric Clapton, the Eagles, and many more released albums mixed for 4-channel stereos. But many consumers couldn't justify buying a new receiver for 2 additional speakers, and the concept ended in 1978. The music industry then moved on to digital recording, which was the next best thing in the market. These old quadraphonic receivers can still sell for around $200 if they are in working condition. 4 speakers to blast disco in your living room. Your neighbors must have loved that. Clairol Yogurt Shampoo. The 1970s saw a trend of incorporating natural food ingredients like lemon, honey, and other herbs into beauty and hygiene products. Clairol decided to up the game with yogurt shampoo in 1979. You know, because everyone wanted that healthy hair. Turns out, the company was completely wrong. Many consumers were confused about what they had purchased, and some people even tried eating it. Is it for my hair or my breakfast? A question no one should have to ask about their shampoo. Laserdisc. The Laserdisc was essentially a predecessor to the DVD. It was introduced in 1978 and offered consumers higher picture quality and sound than VHS tapes. However, they seemed to have more drawbacks than benefits. One of the biggest was the fact that you couldn't record on them. They were also pretty expensive. They hung on for a little while and then tried to make a comeback in the 1990s. But they ultimately failed for good when the DVD came on strong. Big, expensive, and couldn't record your favorite shows. The Laserdisc, a movie lover's very fancy frisbee. Speaking of things that didn't quite stick the landing, if you're enjoying these blasts from the past, why not give this video a like? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more trips down memory lane. We dig up all sorts of forgotten gems and duds. Sony Betamax. Betamax was introduced by Sony in 1975, which was 1 year before JVC introduced the VHS tape. Betamax had superior resolution and sound quality, which was why it remained a choice of different media outlets for decades. The problem with Betamax was that Sony refrained from licensing its technology to other manufacturers, which limited the variety of movies that were available on this format. Meanwhile, JVC licensed its VHS technology to any manufacturer that was interested. Betamax's share of the VCR market fell from 100% in 1975 to 10% by 1988, and it continued to dwindle in the following years. Betamax, the king of quality who forgot to invite anyone to the party. VHS just let everyone in. Gerber singles. In 1974, the baby food giant Gerber came up with a new idea. Why not create baby food for adults? They believed that there would be a market for this, and they couldn't be more wrong. Adults were never fond of the mushy meat and food, and Gerber's singles failed horribly, because nothing says sophisticated adult meal like strained peas in a tiny jar. Bon appetit? Downy Flakes Toaster Eggs. Downy Flakes toaster eggs were introduced in 1972. They looked like some sort of frisbee or hockey puck. They were hoping to capitalize on the popularity of other products like Pop-Tarts. But by 1975, they were removed from the store shelves. Toaster eggs that looked like hockey pucks. Maybe the goal was to make breakfast a contact sport. World Football League. Over the years, there have been several attempts to compete against the NFL. In 1974, the World Football League hit the field. It made it through one full season in 1974 and most of the second season when the whole idea fumbled. Their hopes of world football domination never really made it past 13 teams, one of which being in Honolulu, Hawaii. The World Football League, ambitious name, slightly less worldwide results. Aloha to that dream. Swing bike. The swing bike was a bicycle that allowed the rider to steer the front wheel and the rear wheel. The design was patented by Ralph Belden in 1974, and it was sold on the market in 1975. They really weren't meant for transportation as much as they were for looking cool and doing stunts. It had a second steering wheel axis in front of the seat. You could ride with one wheel on the curb and the other one in the road in sort of an S shape. The bike was somewhat difficult to steer, which meant that it was easier to fall and get hurt. It was discontinued in 1978. The swing bike. Today, most of these products aren't much more than a memory. Very few of them have ever survived the trash dump. But if you happen to have some of these and you're willing to sell them, then perhaps you can make a pretty penny on eBay. Can you think of any other failures from the 1970s that we missed? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing about the gadgets and gizmos.
To Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set. Now you can automatically videotape your favorite show even when you're not home and watch it anytime you...
In disbelief, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more dives into the fascinating and sometimes funny history of things. The 1980s, a decade of big hair, blockbuster movies, and, well, some inventions so out there, you have to wonder, what were they thinking? We all remember the Walkman and the VCR, but what about the brilliant ideas that crashed and burned harder than a stock market broker in 1987? Today, we're digging into 10 of the most spectacular product fails from the iconic 80s. Buckle up, this is going to be a bumpy but hilarious ride. New Coke. Let's start with a true legend of failure. New Coke. In 1985, the Coca-Cola Company made a monumental decision to change its nearly century-old secret formula. Why? Believe it or not, Pepsi was gaining ground in taste tests. So, New Coke was born, sweeter and supposedly preferred in blind tests. The public outcry, however, was immediate and ferocious. People didn't just dislike New Coke, they felt betrayed. Hoarding of original Coke began, protests erupted, and the company was flooded with angry calls and letters. No, within a mere 79 days, Coca-Cola waved the white flag and brought back the original formula, rebranded as Coca-Cola Classic. New Coke limped on for a few more years under different names, but never recovered. It became a textbook example of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Especially when it is a beloved American icon. New Coke, the beverage equivalent of a surprise party nobody wanted. Sometimes, progress tastes an awful lot like regret. Kodak disc film. Remember the excitement of getting your photos developed? Kodak tried to make it even easier in 1982 with their disc film. Instead of a roll, the film was arranged on a flat disc housed in a plastic cartridge. The cameras were slim, pocketable, and super easy to load. Just pop in the disc. The idea was to make photography foolproof for the average snap shooter. The problem? The negatives on the disc were tiny, just 10 millimeters by 8 meters. This resulted in grainy, often blurry photos if you tried to enlarge them to standard print sizes. Despite massive marketing, the poor image quality couldn't be ignored. Professional photographers scoffed, and even casual users noticed their vacation pics looked a bit sad. While the cameras sold well initially due to convenience, the film format itself was a dud and was eventually discontinued in 1999. Kodak disc film, proving that sometimes convenience comes at the very fuzzy, very grainy price of your memories. Premier cigarettes. In the late 80s, with smoking already facing increased scrutiny, Reynolds Tobacco Company launched Premier, marketed as a cleaner, smokeless cigarette. The technology was complex. A small carbon tip heated a tobacco-like capsule, releasing an aerosol rather than smoke. It produced almost no secondhand smoke and significantly less tar. Sounds like a game changer, right? Well, not quite. Users complained it was difficult to light, had a bizarre, often unpleasant taste and smell. Some compared it to burning plastic, or even worse. One critic famously said it tasted like fecal matter. Moreover, the media and health officials were skeptical, and there were even concerns it could be used as a drug delivery device. After spending hundreds of millions on development, Premier was quickly extinguished from the market within a year. Premier cigarettes, so advanced, they forgot to make them smokable. The future of smoking, apparently, smelled terrible. Seiko TV watch. Imagine this. It's 1982, and James Bond himself is sporting a watch that can receive television broadcasts. The Seiko TV watch, or the DXA001, was pure 80s sci-fi made real. It featured a tiny 1.2-inch liquid crystal display. To actually watch TV, you needed to connect it to a Walkman-sized receiver that you'd typically clip to your belt or keep in a pocket, plus a bulky headset antenna. It was an incredible feat of miniaturization for its time, but practicality was another story. The screen was minuscule, battery life was short, and the price tag was a hefty $495. That's over $1,500 in today's money. It was more of a very expensive, somewhat cumbersome novelty than a truly useful device. While undeniably cool, it didn't exactly fly off the shelves. The Seiko TV watch. For when you absolutely, positively had to watch a grainy, postage stamp-sized soap opera on your wrist, and didn't mind looking like you were trying to contact outer space, feeling that 80s nostalgia, or maybe just marveling at these misfires. If you're enjoying this trip back in time, do us a favor and hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next batch of retro oddities and forgotten treasures. Fisher-Price PXL 2000. In 1987, Fisher-Price, known for its durable kids' toys, ventured into a new market with the PXL 2000, also known as Pixel Vision. It was a camcorder marketed to children, promising them the ability to make their own movies. The truly unique and cost-saving part was that it recorded black and white video and audio onto standard audio cassette tapes. Each cassette could hold about 11 minutes of grainy, low-resolution footage. While the idea of a kid-friendly camcorder was appealing, and the $100 price tag was relatively low, the video quality was, to put it mildly, very basic. It was often blurry, with a distinct, ghostly aesthetic. Commercially, it wasn't a huge hit and was discontinued after a couple of years. However, its unique look later made it a cult favorite among experimental filmmakers and artists. The PXL 2000. Making home movies look like eerie surveillance footage from another dimension, all on your dad's old Bon Jovi tapes. Pepsi AM. Need a little pick-me-up with your bacon and eggs? In 1989, Pepsi decided that what the world really needed was a cola specifically for breakfast. Enter Pepsi AM. It boasted all the sugar and twice the caffeine of regular Pepsi, supposedly formulated to compete with coffee. The marketing campaign suggested it was the perfect way to get your day going. Consumers, however, were largely unconvinced that a sugary, highly caffeinated soda was the ideal morning beverage. The idea of cracking open a Pepsi at 7 a.m. just didn't sit right with most folks. Unsurprisingly, Pepsi AM had a very short shelf life and was discontinued by 1990. Pepsi AM. Because who needs coffee when you can start your day with a sugar rush and enough caffeine to power a small city? Apparently, most people. The DeLorean car. Few cars are as instantly recognizable as the DeLorean DMC-12, with its iconic stainless steel body and those futuristic gull-wing doors. Brainchild of former GM exec John DeLorean, it launched in 1981 with immense hype. Marketed as an ethical sports car, it was built in Northern Ireland. However, the dream quickly soured. The car was criticized for being underpowered for its price, had build quality issues, and the stainless steel panels were famously difficult to paint and showed every fingerprint. The company faced severe financial troubles, and John DeLorean himself was arrested in a highly publicized, though ultimately unsuccessful, drug trafficking sting in 1982, an attempt to save his failing company. Production halted by 1983 after only about 9,000 cars were made. While a commercial disaster in its time, its starring role in Back to the Future cemented its place in pop culture history. The DeLorean. It couldn't quite hit 88 mph in the sales charts, but it sure made a dent in cinematic history. Great Scott, what a business plan. Atari Touch Tablet. In the early 80s, home computers were booming, and Atari was a huge name. To enhance its 8-bit computer line, Atari released the Touch Tablet in 1983. This was a graphics tablet that allowed users to draw directly onto the computer screen using a special stylus. It came bundled with a drawing program called Atari Artist. The idea was to make computers more accessible and creative for art and design. While it was a neat concept, the tablet wasn't a massive commercial success. It was perhaps a bit ahead of its time for the home market. The software was limited, and it faced competition from other input devices like joysticks and light pens, which were more geared towards gaming, Atari's main strength. It remained a niche product for enthusiasts rather than a mainstream hit. The Atari Touch Tablet, letting you draw like Picasso, if Picasso only had 16 colors and was really patient with early 80s processing speeds. Private eye display. Long before Google Glass or VR headsets became common buzzwords, a company called Reflection Technology was pioneering wearable displays in the late 1980s. Their flagship product was the Private Eye, a miniature display that, when held up to one eye, created the illusion of a full-sized monitor floating in space. It used a rapidly vibrating mirror and a strip of LEDs to project an image. The concept was revolutionary, promising hands-free information access for everyone from technicians to surgeons. Several companies licensed it for various products, including a head-mounted display for a portable computer and even a potential video game peripheral for Nintendo. However, most of these end products either failed to materialize or were commercial flops themselves. The Private Eye was groundbreaking tech, but the world and supporting applications just weren't quite ready for it. The Private Eye, giving you a tiny glimpse of the future, one slightly headache-inducing red-on-black display at a time. Speaker Vest. The 80s were all about making a statement, and what better way to do that than to literally wear your music? Enter the Speaker Vest. This fashion-forward, or fashion-failed, garment featured built-in speakers, usually on the shoulders or chest, connected to a pocket for your personal cassette player like a Walkman. The idea was to have your own personal soundtrack on the go without pesky headphones. However, the sound quality was often tinny. The vests could be bulky. And let's face it, broadcasting your taste in music to everyone around you wasn't always appreciated. It was a novelty item that screamed 80s fad and never achieved mainstream acceptance, quickly becoming a quirky footnote in the history of wearable tech. The Speaker Vest. For those who wanted to share their love of Journey with the entire bus, whether the bus wanted to hear it or not. And there you have it, 10 titans of technological turmoil from the 1980s. It just goes to show that for every brilliant success, there are a dozen ideas that seemed better on the drawing board. Which of these 80s fails do you remember? Or did we miss one that you think deserves a spot on the list of legendary flops? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your memories. If you enjoyed this blast from the past and want more retro reviews, forgotten tech, and pop culture deep dives, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up.
The 1970s, a time of disco balls, shag carpets, and radioactive heart implants. Welcome back to Retro USA Memories, where we don't just bring back the good old days, we also remind you how lucky we are to still be alive. Today, we're diving into 9 inventions from the 70s so wild, so shockingly dangerous, they were eventually banned for good. Buckle up. Or don't. It's the 70s. Seatbelts were optional anyway. 1. Radioactive pacemakers. In the 1970s, medical innovation was booming, and nothing said cutting edge quite like implanting a nuclear reactor inside your chest. These devices were powered by plutonium-238, a radioactive element also used in space probes and nuclear warheads. The logic batteries that could last 20-30 years without replacement, a dream for heart patients. But there was a small catch: if the pacemaker was damaged in an accident or during cremation, it could release radioactive material into the environment. Most people in the general public had no idea that these nuclear-powered pacemakers even existed. They were developed mostly through military contractors and elite medical programs, and while they were implanted in several hundred patients, they were never widely advertised. Medical professionals were divided. Some praised the long battery life, while others quietly whispered, "Wait, we're putting plutonium in people." The turning point came in the late 1970s and early 80s, as public concern about nuclear safety, especially after the 3 Mile Island incident in 1979, grew. Suddenly, having a ticking radioactive time bomb in Grandpa's chest didn't feel so reassuring. By the mid-1980s, production was halted, and today, they're not used anywhere outside of very specific aerospace projects. Fun fact: special retrieval teams were trained to safely remove pacemakers from deceased patients to avoid contamination during cremation. Yes, people had a literal nuclear end-of-life plan. 2. Radium dial watches. Glow-in-the-dark watches felt like pure magic in the early 20th century, and even into the 1970s, some cheap luminous models still used traces of radium paint. These watches had a dark history. In the 1920s and 30s, female factory workers, later known as the radium girls, were told to lick their paintbrushes for precision as they painted glowing numbers. They were assured the paint was safe. It wasn't. Many developed horrific illnesses: jaw necrosis, anemia, and bone cancer. Lawsuits followed, but somehow, radium-based products lingered on shelves and wrists into the 70s, especially in cheap imports or older stock. By the 1970s, most Americans were vaguely aware that radiation equals bad, thanks to growing Cold War fears. But the average consumer didn't realize that their glow-in-the-dark watch might be radioactive. As technology improved, safer alternatives like tritium and phosphorescent paints replaced radium. The U.S. government officially banned consumer radium use in watches by the late 1970s, although leftover stock circulated into the early 80s. My take: time flies, especially when your wristwatch could double as a Geiger counter. Beautiful, deadly, and glowing with regret. 3. Thalidomide pills. Thalidomide is perhaps one of the darkest pharmaceutical chapters in modern history, and by the 1970s, it was still haunting the world. Initially released in the late 1950s as a remedy for morning sickness and insomnia in pregnant women, thalidomide was hailed as a miracle drug, especially in Europe. But within a few years, horrifying consequences emerged: thousands of babies born with severe limb deformities, underdeveloped organs, and even missing eyes. FDA Inspector Francis Kelsey famously blocked its approval in 1960, citing insufficient safety data. That decision likely spared thousands of American families. However, by the early 1970s, thalidomide was still available in some countries, and leftover supplies existed globally, often through black market sales or experimental use. Reactions in the U.S. ranged from horror to cautious scientific curiosity. Some researchers investigated whether thalidomide could treat leprosy, AIDS, or multiple myeloma, which it eventually was approved for, under very tight restrictions, in the 1990s. By 1970, it was banned for general use in most Western countries, but the scars remained, both physical and emotional. My take: This is one of those stories where science failed the people, and then somehow came full circle. The drug was dangerous, but the bureaucracy that let it spread, even worse.
The really sure kill feature of this insect killer isn't simply
4.
that it contains
DDT,
DDT,
the pesticide
it's the
that
way
killed
that it
more than
makes
just
sure
bugs.
that bugs get the DDT
In the
that's in it.
1970s,
For
DDT
example,
wasn't just in your
take
bug
this
spray,
liquid and
it was
quickly
practically part of the
and
food
dries
chain.
in half an hour.
First introduced
It
in the
forms a clear,
1940s,
long-lasting protective
DDT,
coating,
dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, was hailed as a miracle
Other
pesticide.
preparations, sprays,
It wiped
for
out
instance,
mosquitoes,
not only
kept
irritate
crops
the nasal
clean,
passages
and
fog
saved
up the
countless
atmosphere,
lives from
but
malaria.
quickly lose their
But by the late
effectiveness as the
60s and
fog
early
is dissipated.
70s, the
As
miracle
a
had
result,
turned monster.
spraying must be repeated
DDT
time
didn't just
after
kill
time.
pests, it stuck around.
But not so
in
with this.
soil,
Pest
in
Destroy
water,
goes right where it
in animals. It bioaccumulated, climbing the food chain, growing stronger with each step. And by the time it reached top predators like bald eagles, it was thinning eggshells and threatening entire species. Americans were slow to react at first. It wasn't until Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book Silent Spring 1962 that public awareness started to shift. By the 1970s, the environmental movement was gaining real traction. Activists, scientists, and even everyday families began pushing for a ban. The EPA banned DDT in in 1972. It was a major win for conservation and a turning point in how we viewed the cost of chemical solutions. But let's be honest, some households still had old cans in their sheds for years afterward. Nothing screams Grandpa's garage like a rusty DDT can next to a mason jar of screws. My take: killing bugs is fine. Killing eagles, fish, and future generations, maybe not so much. 5. Shoe-fitting X-ray machines. Step right up and get irradiated. Remember going shoe shopping as a kid? If you grew up before the mid-1970s, you might have stuck your feet into a strange wooden box with a green screen and seen your bones. Welcome to the shoe-fitting fluoroscope, a device that blasted your feet with X-rays to show if your new shoes fit just right. Sounds fancy, right? Well, they were everywhere. In department stores, family shops, even local cobblers. Kids loved it. Parents trusted it. Salespeople thought it was cutting edge. What no one realized, these machines leaked radiation like a busted microwave, often directly at eye level for children. There were no proper safety regulations, and the machines weren't regularly calibrated. Some models emitted radiation doses 100 times what's considered safe today. By the 1950s, medical experts raised red flags. But it wasn't until the early 1970s that most states started banning them, some reluctantly, after lawsuits. Still, for many boomers, the memory is real, that little thrill of watching your toes wiggle on a screen while your DNA quietly protested. My take: we risked permanent cell damage to see if our sneakers were snug, and somehow, we're still here. 6. Mercury thermometers. Shake it, break it, poison your house. If you were sick in the 1970s, someone probably stuck a long glass stick under your tongue and told you, don't bite down. Why? Because that thermometer was filled with liquid mercury, a neurotoxin that, once spilled, could poison your whole kitchen. Mercury thermometers were everywhere, cheap, accurate, and totally normal until they broke, which, let's face it, happened often. When one shattered, silver droplets rolled across the floor like magic. Kids chased them. Adults ignored them. Ventilation hazmat suits. Please. We wiped it up with tissues and hoped for the best. The public's attitude was casual, at best. It wasn't until the late 70s and early 80s that concerns about mercury exposure and vapor toxicity became mainstream. Children, pregnant women, and infants were particularly at risk. Mercury can affect the nervous system, brain development, and motor skills. But hey, at least it looked cool while ruining your health. Most schools and hospitals began phasing them out in the 1980s. The U.S. formally banned sale of mercury thermometers for consumer use in 2001, but by then, the damage was done, and many homes still had one in a dusty drawer. My take: great for measuring fevers. Terrible if dropped. Even worse if your brother tried to play with it like a lava lamp. 7. Lead paint, bright colors, dull minds. In the 1970s, lead paint was everywhere, on walls, toys, furniture, cribs, and even lunchboxes. Why? Because it was cheap, vibrant, and long-lasting. That fire engine red or canary yellow you remember from your childhood bedroom? Yep, probably full of lead. For decades, nobody questioned it. Lead made paint dry faster, resist moisture, and keep colors bold. But under that glossy finish was a ticking time bomb, especially for kids. Children exposed to lead, often by chewing on painted surfaces or inhaling dust, faced severe developmental problems: decreased IQ, behavioral disorders, learning disabilities, in extreme cases, even seizures or coma. In poor and inner-city communities, where old housing stock dominated, the crisis hit hardest. By the 1970s, scientists had mountains of data linking lead exposure to neurological damage. But industry groups pushed back hard, saying more research was needed. Classic playbook. Public awareness finally tipped in the mid-1970s thanks to activism, medical studies, and some very angry parents. The U.S. government officially banned lead-based paint for residential use in 1978, but by then, millions of homes were already coated in the stuff. My take: sure, the colors were beautiful, but so are crayons, and we don't lick walls full of those either. 8. Leaded gasoline, brain damage at every red light. There was a time when the smell of gasoline meant summer, freedom, and neurotoxins. In the 1970s, leaded gasoline was the norm. Tetraethyl lead was added to improve engine performance and reduce knocking. It worked. But every time you filled up or idled in traffic, you were releasing airborne lead into the environment. Lead particles settled in soil near highways, playgrounds, and schools. Kids played in it. People breathed it. And the consequences were brutal, especially for developing brains. Despite mounting evidence, oil companies fought regulation tooth and nail. They funded research saying lead was safe, blamed poor parenting for behavioral issues, and even discredited scientists. Still, by the mid-1970s, the truth became undeniable. The EPA began phasing out leaded gas in 1975, mandating catalytic converters in new cars. Complete bans took years. It wasn't until 1996 that leaded fuel was fully banned for on-road vehicles in the U.S. My take. We used to poison ourselves daily just to avoid engine knocking. Now we know better, and our kids' report cards thank us. And that's just part 1. Stay tuned for even more dangerously dumb inventions, including toys that doubled as weapons and hairdryers filled with asbestos. If you survived the 1970s without glowing, combusting, or coughing up lead dust, consider yourself lucky, and maybe a little radioactive.
Welcome back to Retro USA Memories, where nostalgia meets danger and sometimes explodes. In today's episode, we're heading back into the house. Not just any house, a 1970s home where toys could maim you and hairdryers might quietly kill you. Buckle your bell bottoms, because these are 9 more banned inventions from the 70s that prove safety was optional. 1. Asbestos hairdryers, style now. Sickness later. Selling quality dryers at home were all the rage big plastic domes you'd park your head under for 45 minutes while flipping through TV Guide. What nobody realized, many of them were insulated with asbestos, right where your face went. Asbestos was cheap, heat-resistant, and extremely carcinogenic. It wasn't until a 1979 FDA study found dangerously high levels in handheld and hooded hairdryers that the public freaked out. Manufacturers quickly phased them out by the early 80s, but not before years of exposure. Fun fact, asbestos wasn't just in dryers, it was in floor tiles, insulation, even fake fireplace snow. 2. Lawn darts jarts, the backyard weapon of choice. Ah, yes. The beloved lawn dart, a foot-long metal-tipped missile marketed as a family game. Just toss it toward a plastic ring and try not to hit your cousin in the skull. These were shockingly popular in the 1970s. But emergency rooms started noticing a pattern head trauma, eye injuries, even deaths. By 1988, after several child fatalities and pressure from consumer safety groups, finally banned them. Ironically, adults loved them for their accuracy, and kids loved them for how far they could throw. M80s and homemade explosives. Legalish fireworks from hell. In the 70s, you didn't need a permit to blow your fingers off just an older cousin and a trip across state lines. M80s, originally military-grade training explosives, were sold under the counter or as novelty items. People used them to launch mailboxes into orbit, vaporize pumpkins, or just see what would happen. By the late 70s, after thousands of injuries and some gruesome deaths, the U.S. banned M80s and other unregulated homemade explosives under federal law. Electric blankets with no auto shutoff. Toasty or toasted. Snuggling up with an electric blanket was peak comfort in winter. But early models had no shutoff, faulty wiring, and sometimes caught fire while people slept. In the 1970s, house fires linked to blankets soared. The problem: people left them on all night, folded them tightly, damaging the wires, or used aging units without realizing the danger. By the early 1990s, UL safety standards were introduced requiring auto shutoff and better insulation. Gas space heaters, silent killers. These boxy little heaters looked harmless, but often lacked proper ventilation, leading to carbon monoxide poisoning, a silent, odorless gas that could knock you out in minutes. In the 70s, they were in millions of homes, trailers, and cabins. People loved the heat, but CO deaths quietly climbed. After multiple lawsuits and public service campaigns, most models were banned or redesigned by the mid-1980s. 6. Flammable children's pajamas, now in ignitable polyester. In the name of fashion, many kids' pajamas in the 1970s were made from untreated polyester blends, soft, colorful, and highly flammable. Fires from space heaters or cigarettes could turn these pajamas into melting napalm on a child's skin. After numerous incidents, the U.S. introduced the Flammable Fabrics Act amendments in 1972, requiring sleepwear to meet new flammability standards. Aerosol, sprays with toxic propellants. From deodorants to whipped cream cans, aerosol sprays were everywhere, and so were their toxic propellants like butane and CFCs. Aside from the ozone damage, many sprays in the 70s were highly flammable. Some teenagers huffed them for a quick high, others accidentally turned their bathrooms into mini fireballs. By the late 70s, CFCs were banned in sprays, and many household aerosol formulas were reformulated. Popcorn makers that could explode. These plug-in popcorn poppers seemed innocent until the plastic lids warped from heat or oil built up, causing violent eruptions of hot butter and kernels, burns, countertop fires, and the occasional popcorn projectile injury led to redesigns and recalls in the early 80s. One brand even got pulled after reports of the lid shattering mid-pop. Tris treated children's clothes, flame retardant. But cancerous, Tris was a flame retardant chemical used on children's clothes in the early 1970s. The idea: prevent burns. The reality: Tris is a mutagen and probable carcinogen absorbed through the skin. By 1977, studies showed Tris could cause DNA damage. Parents were outraged. Manufacturers scrambled. The U.S. banned Tris in children's garments in 1978, though it showed up later in other products like furniture foam. And there you have it, a whole house full of dangers, brought to you by the 1970s. From flying darts to toxic pajamas. It's a miracle we made it through childhood at all. If you enjoyed this time travel through chaos, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Retro USA Memories. We've still got one more episode, and trust us, the worst is yet to come.
Welcome back to Retro USA Memories, where we love the 70s, even the parts that nearly exploded, melted, or mutated us. In part 3 of our Banned Inventions series, we're leaving the house and heading into the world of big business and big mistakes. Buckle up, preferably not in a turbine-powered car. Cigarette ads targeting kids, cool, colorful, criminal. In the 1970s, cigarette companies still advertised freely, on TV, billboards, even cartoon mascots. Brands like Kool and Camel used colorful characters, sports tie-ins, and even free toys to attract teens. Ads showed doctors recommending brands or cool kids lighting up behind the school. The backlash grew quickly, led by parents, teachers, and public health advocates. The Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act banned cigarette ads on TV and radio in 1971, but print ads aimed at youth persisted into the 80s. Toy chemistry sets with real uranium. Yes, in the 1970s, certain toy chemistry kits actually included uranium ore samples. Companies like Gilbert sold atomic energy labs in earlier decades, but vintage stock circulated into the 70s via garage sales and collector catalogs. These kits let kids measure radiation with Geiger counters, build cloud chambers, and feel like mini-scientists, all while handling radioactive material. By the late 70s, such sets were pulled due to rising nuclear fears, and federal restrictions were tightened under the Atomic Energy Act. Fun? Yes. Safe? Let's just say no modern toy comes with a radiation warning label. Ephedra and fen-phen, diet pills with a deadly price. In the battle against belly fat, the 1970s gave us ephedra, a natural stimulant that promised energy, appetite suppression, and fast weight loss. It worked, a little too well. Ephedra raised heart rate, blood pressure, and risk of heart attacks, strokes, and sudden death. Paired with other drugs like fenfluramine in the infamous fen-phen combo, it became a lethal mix. Despite red flags, it was heavily marketed, especially to women. The FDA banned fen-phen in 1997 and ephedra for supplements in 2004. Weight loss isn't worth a heart explosion. Just eat fewer Twinkies. Carbon tetrachloride, the cleaner that cleaned you out. This industrial cleaning solvent was a staple in homes and factories. It removed stains, degreased metal, and even worked in fire extinguishers. Problem? It was highly toxic, especially when inhaled or absorbed through the skin. It damaged the liver, kidneys, and nervous system, and was a probable human carcinogen. It took years of workplace poisonings and animal studies to convince regulators. By the mid-1980s, carbon tetrachloride was largely banned for consumer use. If your cleaning product needs a hazmat suit, maybe stick with vinegar. Lead-lined lunchboxes, tastes like heavy metal. It sounds insane now, but some insulated lunchboxes in the 1970s used lead-lined vinyl to keep food cool. Tests later found that lead could leach into sandwiches, especially when heated in the sun. Kids absorbed it by touch or ingestion, with all the classic symptoms: learning delays, behavioral issues, and organ damage. By the early 1980s, new safety standards banned lead from lunchboxes, toys, and food containers. Chrysler turbine car, the jet that never took off. It looked like the future, sleek, powerful, and powered by a jet engine. Literally. The Chrysler turbine car was introduced in the early 1960s, but lingered in testing through the 1970s. It could run on anything flammable: gasoline, kerosene, even tequila, allegedly. People were thrilled until they actually drove it. It roared like a jet, had dangerously high exhaust temperatures, guzzled fuel, and polluted like a factory. Worse, its turbine parts were incredibly expensive to replace. Public interest faded fast. Chrysler recalled and scrapped most units by 1979. Today, only a few remain in museums. Fun to test, terrifying to park in a garage. PCBs, toxic coolants in every transformer. Polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, were used in coolants, paints, sealants, and electronics. Fire-resistant and chemically stable, they seemed like an industrial dream, but they didn't break down, ever. And they leaked into rivers, soil, and eventually human fat cells. By the 1970s, workers were reporting liver issues, rashes, and neurological symptoms. Scientists found PCBs in breast milk, wildlife, even Arctic ice. The U.S. banned PCB production in 1979, but cleanup efforts continue today. Some contaminated sites are still labeled toxic zones. If your product ends up in polar bears, maybe rethink your formula. Gasoline cans without safety nozzles. Before safety spouts and child-proof caps, gas cans were metal or plastic jugs with open tops, prone to spills, vapor buildup, and fires. One spark could ignite the fumes. Children drank from them. Adults used them near grills. Thousands of accidents were reported yearly. By the early 90s, new regulations required spill-proof spouts and safer storage designs. But the 70s were a flammable free-for-all. So that wraps up Part 3, the end of our trilogy of terrifying tech. From jet cars to radioactive toys, the 1970s proved that innovation sometimes runs faster than common sense. If you survived this era without glowing, combusting, or getting lead poisoning from your sandwich, you deserve a medal. Subscribe to Retro USA Memories for more blasts from the unsafe past, and don't forget to share your wildest memories in the comments.